Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this call. It's Martin Limas from HRAI here. I'm here with Dorothy McCabe, HRAI's Government Relations Specialist for the Province of Ontario, and Loretta Zita, who will be with us managing the webinar and keeping us on track. Also joining us today will be Alexandra Campbell, Vice President of Communications and Stakeholder Relations at TSSA, and Tom Ayers, General Counsel for TSSA. Of course, we're really only together here in this virtual space. Physically, we're all stationed at our home offices, as we should be. But hopefully, with us being all over the place, we'll still be able to make this work in a reasonably seamless way. Please note that all attendees, because of the numbers, we won't be able to take questions verbally. We'll encourage you to submit questions by way of the chat, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the session. You are, for the moment, all muted for the duration of the presentation. So go to the next slide, please, and the next one. So it's only been a week since we had our first webinar on this topic, the topic that's on everyone's mind, but it feels like it's been 100 years, of course, how time drags when the economy and all of our customary patterns of activity screech to a halt. Yet every day there's new information, new statistics, new guidance from the government on how we should be dealing with this strange unseen enemy. So we fill our days with that. Who would have thought that we'd actually be looking forward in the government relations side of things, that is, looking forward to getting back to our discussions about trades, training, regulations, and what will replace the Ontario College of Trades. But I do look forward to that day. But for the moment, we're focused on this pandemic issue. To keep on top of the COVID-19, it's important that we at HRAI we keep all of our channels of information open, and there are many ways to do that. We're using emails, newsletters, the website as much as possible, and now we're hoping this webinar format has some value for you as well, and we will welcome your feedback on that in that regard. Today, we want to briefly review some new information from the Ontario government that we have compiled over the past week, and we'll try to answer some of the questions you've been asking. Questions especially related to the essential services designation and what that implies for our sector. We'll also cover some of the federal government's economic plan to provide support for small and medium enterprises. We're going to also share some time today with TSSA's Alexandra Campbell and Tom Ayers, as mentioned, who will review TSSA's COVID-19 protocols, and we'll discuss a revamped approach to contractor audits and whatever else they'd like to share with us today. Finally, we're here, of course, to hear from members, any feedback on actions that you might have, what you've heard, and any remaining concerns that HRAI might be in a position to take forward on your behalf. Again, please post comments and questions via the question feature on the side of your screen. We'll go through the presentations first and we'll respond to questions at the end. We budgeted an hour. Our updates will not take the full hour. We want to leave as much time as possible to hear and respond to your comments and questions. Questions we don't get to today, we'll try to respond to in a timely fashion after the session is over. Next screen, please, Loretta.
Got it.
So last week, the most common question coming out of our webinar was about whether or not HVACR would be exempt from the freshly announced Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act Ontario. That was announced a week ago today, right about this time. HRAI made efforts in Ontario, as it did in every other province, alongside many other trade associations, to have our industry designated as an essential service. EMCPA shuts down all non-essential businesses for initial 14 days, which we expect will likely be extended. The emergency declaration itself and the orders under the legislation have a limit of up to 14 days, after which the Lieutenant Governor and Council, also known as the Provincial Cabinet, can renew it for another 14 days. After that, the Legislative Assembly can approve an extension of that declaration for up to 20 days, and approval by the Legislative Assembly for renewals are indefinite, depending on the nature of the issue. When we've asked, the government has not committed to a final duration for these measures. The government has stated that it's trying to flatten the curve so that the health system does not become overwhelmed. And at the moment, the problem is still getting worse, not better. So there's no end in sight at this time. As you will know by now, HVACR services made the list of exempted businesses, but that does not give companies unrestricted freedom to continue operating without some change. We'll come back to that in a minute. And a number of questions remain, as they do for many other sectors. Last week, a meeting between the Office of the Premier of Ontario and a few dozen business associations addressed numerous questions on the minds of small business owners. But if anything, the answers to the questions made clear that the government is still working out details somewhat on the fly, and that every day will bring further clarifications and possibly further changes. In that meeting were the Assistant Deputy Ministers for all the relevant provincial ministries: Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, Health Services, the Ministry of Health, Solicitor General, and the Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development. So some questions remain, and I'm just going to cover very quickly some of those Q&As. First one, hopefully fairly straightforward, and hopefully all the people on the call have explored for themselves what they are expected to do in the circumstances. But I'm going to quote what are exempted businesses required to do. This is a quote directly from that meeting with the ADMs. We're asking you to shut down businesses, taking every precaution to make workplaces safe, and if you continue your operations, allow employees to work remotely from home where possible. Where working from home is not possible, a reduction in staff to focus on key business needs is what we encourage. Everyone must be practicing social distancing, which means not being within 2 meters of another person. These orders are not recommendations. They must be obeyed to help contain the coronavirus and prevent people from dying. Police services across the province have the authority to enforce compliance, end quote. So continuation of regular business functions is allowed as long as all public health protocols are in place, including hand washing, hand sanitizer, social distancing, and all the rest that you've become familiar with. So this leads to a question about, I already talked about the duration. I think I covered that previously. This could be a month, it could be longer, so we'll just leave it at that for now. Enforcement for non-compliance. I've had a number of questions about this. The province has asked police services across the province to enforce the emergency orders. Any person, group, director, or officer of an organization who fails to comply with an order or who interferes or obstructs any person exercising such power may be found guilty of an offense. The fines are relatively small, $750 for an individual failing to comply with an order, $1,000 for obstructing any person from exercising a power in accordance with an order, and a few others. And these apply to owners of companies as well as officers and so on. But the initial fines are relatively small. On the enforcement side, the emphasis, we've been told, is on education first, to educate the offender, and then talk about proceeding to fines only if the behavior continues. The provincial legislation provides the ability to designate, however, and the declaration as it was issued grants municipalities extraordinary temporary powers to deal with an emergency. This allows the municipalities to fine people who aren't obeying public health requirements or who are hoarding, and to fine non-essential businesses that stay open. Under the province's Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, the regional chair and local mayors can take actions and make orders to deal with the pandemic, which normally would require full council approval. As one limited example, the Toronto Fire Chief Matthew Pegg announced last week that fines for those that violate provincial orders will be up to $100,000 and 1 year imprisonment for individuals, up to $500,000 and 1 year imprisonment for a director or officer of a corporation, and up to $10 million for a corporation. So municipalities across the province are starting to take up their new powers, and we'll see how well whether or not and how well they actually follow through. But that's now on the landscape as well. Next point. This was an interesting question that came up in our little webinar with ADMs, and that was how will people know whether or not we are authorized to stay open? The question was whether or not there would be permits issued or any kind of signage requirement. And the official answer was no signage required, no permits required. But the delayed and kind of lack of response initially suggested to everyone on the call that they hadn't really thought of this. And I'm not sure what the expectation will be going forward. It might be that they might introduce this down the road if the situation continues. Finally, a question that came up a number of times, and we heard this from some members as well, and that is, if an essential services employee becomes ill at work and is sent home, is the business required to shut down for 14 days? I will say here that there are lots of guidelines. We don't need to go through them for you. You will find them anywhere. You've probably already read them yourselves about how to determine any individual, how they can determine whether or not the symptoms they're feeling are truly COVID-19, and what to do and if you have an employee that's exhibiting those symptoms. This is a question more about what happens in a situation where an employee is known to have it and has been sent home. To that question, the answer was that the workplace does not need to shut down, but use of alcohol-based sanitizing, disinfectant of the workstation and area surrounding that employee, and other follow-up to determine if they will have to be done if they test positive. If they are, public health will investigate who was in close contact with the employee, meaning people with significant exposure within 2 meters for a long period of time, not just walking by. Exposed people will be required to go into self-quarantine for 14 days. Next slide, please. Finally, I think we just all need to remember, employers on the call particularly should remember that employees do have the right to refuse work. There is a provincial health and safety phone number shown here for anyone who wants to report unsafe working conditions. For members asking whether they can continue to operate, the comments and advice from officials were, first, to think differently about how you can and do your work in this situation. Think about if you really need to continue working. Ask if it's critical to provide the particular service at this time or can it wait for 14 days. Think about what you can do for your own health, your family's health, your staff's health, and so on. I guess the simple instruction is to start thinking slightly differently. There is a lot of good information available in the public domain. Please use it. Collective safety depends on all of us doing our part to manage this crisis. And the final reminder the government says is COVID-19 is not a permanent situation, but it will require cooperation from many people to come through it. So the bottom line is it's up to business owners to determine for themselves if they want to continue to work despite being deemed an essential service during the crisis. Next slide, please. And most of the responses that we've received from government simply point to this website, which is, I encourage you to go there. It gives you most of the information you need. It certainly lists all of the essential workplaces. It's quite a long list, as you can see, and it's possible in time, just so you know, the government has hinted with the changes in regulations that are coming almost every day, that they are prepared to change if they don't see changes in patterns of behavior. The number of people that were permitted to gather has changed dramatically. Now it's no more than 5. It's possible that they may change the list of essential workplaces as if the problem continues. So that list is there, but subject to change. They also have noted many times that there's a specific phone number showing here too for businesses who would like to have clarification about their status as an essential service. And finally, we would note that all of the answers that we are receiving from government, we are posting on the HRAI website. So if you're in doubt, hopefully you can find what you need on the HRAI website. And if you don't, by all means, give us a call. So that's our quick overview of essential services. That was a big burning issue for many of our members last week. Hopefully this answers most of your questions, if not all of them. The other most common question on the call last week, on the webinar last week, and ever since has been, where can we get supplies of personal protective equipment? and HRAI, and can HRAI assist in some way with this problem? On this topic, I'm going to turn it over to Dorothy to respond to that question. Dorothy.
Thanks, Martin, and for that information, and hello, everyone. So on the question of masks, because as Martin said, it did come up as a key question from last week's webinar. So we did make inquiries into various connections at the provincial government, most specifically to the Minister of Government and Consumer Services, who really has responsibility for the procurement of supplies for Ontario. And so through her office, they got back to us late Friday with some good information about masks. And so the province has worked hard to increase the amount of supplies for our healthcare system. And I'm sure you've heard stories about the shortages in that. So they're working hard to obtain the personal protective equipment that's needed. However, specifically for these N95 masks, what they communicated to us on Friday was that these are not going to be, when they do get their hands on them, because they're still working on that part, but when they do get their hands on them, they are not going to be designated for people outside of healthcare. They're for people in healthcare and for frontline responders. But some of the additional information they provided was that N95 masks, as it's connected to COVID-19, it's not necessary to wear those masks unless you are in an environment and in like close to 2 meters away from someone who is suspected to have it or who does have it. So even healthcare workers are primarily using surgical masks, unless they are, again, within very close proximity to people with or suspected of having COVID-19. So I realize that in some cases, some of the work that tradespeople do and technicians do, you know, with dust and things like that, there can be a need for the N95, but in terms of like the work you're doing, even if you are going into like hospitals, healthcare facilities, long-term care homes, etc. Those type of masks, they're assuring us, are not needed unless you are, again, within that 2 meter circumference of someone. So we hope that helps on that end. And if it's helpful, I'm happy to share a letter that the Chief Medical Officer of Health has provided for people who are outside of the healthcare sector. So that's about the masks. And just the other news from the provincial government last week was, I mean, normally the government would have provided, tabled their annual budget. That got changed into an economic update and fiscal update last Wednesday. And this has been in the news over the past, well, 5 days or so. The province has their response to the COVID-19 crisis is to provide a $17 billion total economic relief package. Significant chunk of that money, about $3.5 billion, is to support the healthcare sector. There's some other new money in there for the education sector, but for the purposes of our discussion, I think the primary importance is that there's the $10 billion that was directed to the business community, and it's $10 billion primarily in deferred tax obligations. So that's 5 to 6 months deferrals of most or many of the taxes that you'd pay. So, example, employer health tax, fuel tax, mining tax, tobacco tax, things like that. These kind of taxes have been deferred. The other thing that's of interest to you that was in last week's economic relief package is that they're changing how the electricity system. So they've brought in a cost relief program to save people money on their energy use, and the big part of that is that they're ending the time of use policies for at least 45 days. The other big part of the economic relief package was that they're bringing in 1.9 billion in relief for employers to reduce the financial strain with respect to WSIB payments. So again, these are a deferral for 6 months. The employer health tax, that was another significant deferral. It's 355 million savings, or deferral, I should say, off the payroll as well. So those were some of the big initiatives in that package. And then, of course, the federal government, I mean, they've really been leading the charge on the overall economic relief package. Oh, sorry, could you advance the slide, Loretta?
Yeah, I did it.
Okay, sorry, I'm looking at a different slide. So the federal government, I mean, their response has continued to evolve, and on Friday it was in the news that they have increased the temporary wage subsidy from 10% up to 75%. So that was really significant news. That's covering businesses of any size, and not-for-profits and charities as well. So it's across the board wage subsidy relief. This is applying to businesses of any size who've experienced a decrease in revenue of at least 30% that is directly the result of COVID-19. Up to 75% of the first $58,700 per employee. So that's about a maximum of $847 per week. It's going to be backdated to March 15th. And that's basically, this was announced just this morning, so that's all the details we have on that. But there will be technical briefings tomorrow, so we should have some more details on that. Or you can go on to the federal government's website to find the details as those are provided. So this is significant relief for you as business owners and you as employees of businesses. And again, to go back to a point that Martin made earlier, that was clearly a significant message coming out of our technical briefing on the essential services piece, was that this is to keep people employed, keep people working if there is work, but to keep people on the payroll, and to help you then really be able to think about about how to do your business and whether you need to actually provide that service at this critical time while everyone's trying to do as much as they can to flatten that curve. So that's news as of just a few hours ago in terms of that wage subsidy. The next slide then, another couple of things that they announced on Friday, just briefly, because you may have already read this over the weekend. The federal government is deferring the HST and GST payments until June, so that's a significant deferral. And then of course there's for people who are having to stay home to look after kids, or maybe they're sick, or maybe they're caring for someone who's sick, there still is that $2,000 per month that is going to be taxable, but not at present time, but it's taxable for next income tax filing. But again, the number, we've put the number there, Employment and Social Development Canada. They are in the best position to answer any specific questions that you may have about your business or about any of your employees. So that's the latest that we know about. Oh, sorry. The other thing from Friday, pardon me, was that the federal government will be offering loan guarantees for up to $40,000 for companies, and the potential for the first $10,000 of that $40,000 loan, the potential for it to be to be completely forgiven, and that's for qualifying businesses. So the details around what's a qualifying business and things like that, that's what we're waiting to have come out tomorrow, we expect. So with that, I will pass it over to Alexandra from TSSA to talk about their protocols during this time. Alexandra? Oh, and sorry, and Tom Ayers as well. Tom and Alexandra from TSSA are with us.
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks for this opportunity. And I'm going to take you through some of the things we're doing at TSSA. There have been updates on our website, and there is going to be more to come over the next few weeks. So I'll start with saying that TSSA has also been considered a list of essential businesses. This means at a high level, our inspection work will continue, but as I'll get to, in some cases, under modified conditions or adapting obviously to the coronavirus situation. Our head office is now closed to the public, and so we're asking everybody to deal with TSSA electronically. Most of you probably already do, but some people do still come to the office. And everything you do business with us, you should be able to do electronically, and you can pay if you have to make payment over the phone with a credit card. General correspondence can go to our customer services at tssa.org email. If you're submitting any applications electronically, usually on the application, there is an inbound email address for that application. But again, if you're not sure where to email it to, you can send it to intake@tssa.org. And our 1-800 number is always available and should be able to offer the email contact information if it's not clear. I did want to assure everybody that for some time, TSSA team members have been taking action to protect health. So we have been instructing our inspectors to stay at home since about the beginning of March. If they had traveled outside of Canada or had any sickness or symptoms of coronavirus, or if they've been in close contact with someone that had traveled or had symptoms. So that precaution has been underway for some time now. Since about the middle of March, our inspectors have also been applying the social distancing to any inspection that they are doing. And they're touching base with the customer ahead of time just to go over our own TSSA protocols and the customer protocols. So we are also asking customers what procedures they have in place with respect to asking employees to stay at home if they've traveled or if they've been sick. In some cases, we are able to move inspections online using Skype or live camera access or photos, and that really does depend on the particular circumstances of the inspection. We aren't going into homes right now, and so that is something that has changed since this has come into place in the last, I think, week and a half. So we are suspending any visits in home unless obviously it's an emergency or a really high risk situation, and there's a reason that we need to be there. And I'll come back to the homes again in a minute because I know that affects some of the contractors and probably some of you that are listening. We are also not typically going to any residential or healthcare facilities where there's vulnerable residents, or particularly in occupied areas. So this really is on a case-by-case basis, but obviously if the facility requests us or needs us there, we're going there. Some types of inspections are continuing, but again, not in occupied areas, and in all cases, our inspectors are connecting with the facility ahead of time to come up with, mutually agreeable circumstances. And also our inspectors are diligently washing their hands, using hand sanitizer when it's available, says sneezing or coughing into their sleeve. And again, if they're sick, they are staying at home. and they're being very cautious with respect to health. So examinations, I guess not surprisingly, at our head office and with the Ministry of Labor and Training are canceled for the foreseeable future. Again, as HRAI said, it's not clear how long all of this will last. We are continuing to renew licenses and certificates. If there's a reason that people can't renew their license or certificate, they should be contacting us. That's what we're encouraging people to do. If your renewal of your license comes with a mandatory pre-license inspection and that can't be performed with a valid reason, we are offering the ability to renew the license and certificates and offering a 90-day grace period for those inspections, or if this goes longer, 14 days after the state of emergency is lifted. And I think, again, specific to fuel oil distributors, and so there is a requirement in some cases to have equipment and tanks inspected on a periodic basis, and where that needs to happen in a home, we are allowing a grace period of 120 days so that fuel oil distributors also don't have to go into homes. Propane installations, I guess in some cases, also require home inspections, and we are offering a grace period of 120 days so that those technicians don't have to go into people's homes. I think that covers most of it. Again,
just one thing I would like to add, Alex.
Yeah.
And that is those of you who are contractors, and you know our previous contractor audit process involved a procedure where we would go into people's homes. And we had proposed to initiate a new contractor audit process, which received a lot of help from HRAI, thank you very much. Was supposed to be launched on January 1st of next year. But given the situation with homes, we've launched it early. And some of you may have already been subject to the new contractor audit process, whereas instead of going into people's homes, we are contacting you to arrange to get you to provide records of the 7 issues that we think are core to being a contractor in the province of Ontario.
Tom, are you able, it's Martin here, are you able to elaborate on that even further? I'm not sure, because I'm going to say that the vast majority of the members on the call would not yet be familiar with that new process.
Yeah, so the process.
Had a smaller group that was involved, but most people will not be aware of the new program.
Well, sure, Martin, I can do that. The new process that we were going to launch on January 1st was a revised contractor audit process. Instead of TSSA doing an inspection of installations performed by a heating contractor, as those of you who have been subjected to a contractor audit would know that that was the previous process. We're now more interested in ensuring that the contractor has the appropriate business controls in place to address the 7 major risks associated with being a heating contractor, and there's 7 main obligations under the regulation. And that is that, you know, you have a process to identify that the equipment being installed is in fact approved, that you have a process in place to make sure that your technicians are in fact licensed and are appropriately licensed for the work that they're doing, that you have a process in place so that you ensure your technicians are installing in accordance with the requirements of the relevant codes, and that they're in compliance, that you have a quality assurance process in place to deal with that, that you ensure for new installations that the installation is in fact inspected by the fuel distributor, that you report incidents to TSSA, that you take steps to report non-compliances like red tags to the appropriate party, and that you attach a pressure test tag to every installation that you install.
Thank you, Tom. There was a notice, I believe, that was issued to this effect by the director, John Marshall.
Yes, there was a director's notice that went out. I don't have the date in front of me, Martin, and it was indicating that we were going to launch this new process effective January 1st, 2021. But given that our current process requires us to go into people's homes, we've moved the date up somewhat. And some of your members may have in fact been contacted by a TSSA inspector. I understand we've done approximately 7 of these new audits already. 70, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find it, but I guess what I was asking was, did a new notice go out to that effect recently?
No new notice has gone out to that effect. They've been in contact. It hasn't been formally launched, Martin. It's been being done on a pretty informal basis. But my understanding from the field staff and from the director is that it's been well received so far.
Yes. Okay, thank you for that. And I'll just add one other footnote to that, and that is that HRAI has been working closely with TSSA to assist in, I guess, developing tools for compliance to allow contractors to meet these requirements in this new audit process. It's a little bit of a shift, and it may or may not be difficult for members to comply. We're still working through that. I think you're right, Tom, that the general reaction has been very positive, but we're working to see whether or not there's some role that HRAI can play in terms of providing guideline documents, standard forms, even just some basic instructions to help members to comply with this new system. So that's a work in progress. We have a group of about 15 or 20 volunteers helping us with that.
Yeah, and that's always very helpful to TSSA because we want to make sure that this is something that's workable for the industry and that it makes sense and that it's appropriate. So we appreciate the assistance on that.
Okay, thank you.
It's Alexander from TSSA. Thanks for that. There was maybe one more point I should have detailed, and that was with respect to the petroleum mechanic certificates. And there's a requirement for training in there. So again, I think I spoke to, we're going to be renewing certificates, but where the training's not available, we're going to offer a 120-day grace period after the social distancing lifted for candidates to submit their continuing education requirements. So I did want to add that. And I also just wanted to say again, if businesses are having COVID-19 related barriers, that really we encourage them to reach out to us if it's with respect to their dealings with TSSA. We're having a lot of success, basically site by site, circumstance by circumstance in working through with industry how to approach a situation. And like you guys, we're all continuing to adapt as we go, and we really appreciate the cooperation.
Okay, thank you. Loretta, I think we'll take some time now for questions. We have 20 minutes left in the hour, so we'll use it if there are any questions. I can't see them, so you'll have to just identify.
No, I'll read them out. From Lisa C, we have, is there any information as to how we use the new wage subsidy? Do we hold back the deductions instead of remittance? Do we deduct them? And does the government send us money?
Yeah, so those are some of the details. Sorry, was it Lisa?
Yes.
That we don't know yet. I mean, this is a program that was announced on Friday. Public servants were working, I'm sure, feverishly over the weekend to put some detail around it. So no, we don't have that level of detail yet. Tuesday, we expect there to be a briefing. So we will know more at that point. I would suggest that, we'll share what we know, that's fine, but I would suggest that you also, with that kind of level of specificity, that you contact that 1-800 number that was on the screen.
Yeah, so the next slide, Loretta. That one. No, that one.
This one.
And it's
and as Dorothy said, yes, that's the one. This stuff is still in development. The Minister of Finance Minister was going to do a briefing. I think, was it today or tomorrow?
No, it's
Dorothy,
tomorrow,
would you say?
sometime tomorrow. It's
Tomorrow.
like, these are programs, I mean, keep in mind, and it's a good question, I'm not dismissing your question, but these are programs that in, normal times, it would probably take them at least a year to put this kind of program together. So they're doing this very quickly. The public servants, I think, are doing a tremendous job. I'll just editorialize that, but they're pulling these things together really, really quickly and in a very much an evolving situation. So, so we just don't have that level of specificity at this point yet.
Okay.
Okay. The other questions are surround this new economic relief package, and I think that we're going to be repeating the same thing. We have one here. Can you explain the current understanding of the 75%? What is the time frame of the 30% decrease in our business? Can't find that info anywhere. The original wage subsidy was to be taken as a deduction from the source deduction calculations. How will we keep people on the payroll without money coming into the business? So this is all dependent on what comes down the pipeline. From what I understand.
Yeah, I don't know that we have answers to any of those questions at this time.
Although I would say that it's backdated to March 15th, and I'm just trying to scroll through some of the information I have, but it's backdated to March 15th in terms of like when this 30% drop in decrease in revenue would have been occurring. So keep that. And in terms of the time frame, they're looking at early April is what I was told in terms of getting the program like ready for people to apply for. So, and getting, I mean, they're on it through other programs. They're looking at getting money flowing in early April as well. So again, they're doing this as quickly as they possibly can. I would say they very much understand the urgency around this.
Okay, I have another question. It is my understanding that we are strongly encouraged to try and keep our employees working if possible. We have had a few sites shut down due to health and safety concerns. Should we keep our employees going, or can we make a decision to lay off, or is it best to hold off until we find out more?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. I think the answer, you probably have the answer in your head, which is you might want to wait a couple of days before you make a decision to lay off. I think, frankly, that the federal government's initiative here is designed in part to help businesses not to take the step of laying off. It will put an enormous burden on the employment insurance funds. So I think that this intent, in part, is intended to preempt that. And obviously, it's in your interest as business owners, if you can, to keep employees on the payroll. So I think that's the goal. But in terms of details on that and how much time you should wait, I think I would suggest you wait a couple of days before making any decisions till you have the right information in hand.
Yeah, and again, remember, it's backdated to March 15th. So yeah.
Okay,
the purpose is to for as much as possible to keep your employees on your payroll.
Right.
Okay, I have another one here. We are being told that we have to pay severance packages to employees that are being placed on a temporary layoff for now until the end of June. Do you have any information of how the Employment Standards Act applies here for people that have been with the company for over 10 years?
Well, I don't think there's any labor lawyers on the call. Maybe Tom is, I don't know. But I think the answer to that question is there shouldn't, if it's a layoff, it's a layoff as opposed to dismissal or whatever. So I wouldn't think that there would be that sort of consideration would enter in at this stage. Presumably it's a layoff with an opportunity to restore full employment at some later date. So severance shouldn't come into that. But again, I'm saying that as a non-employment lawyer. Tom, do you have any experience in that?
I don't have any experience in employment law, and I shouldn't give any advice on that. But generally, if it is a layoff and not a termination, then the rules don't kick in. But there are special rules about how long you can lay someone off without providing them with the return to work date.
Right.
Okay, I have another one. In terms of economic outlook or projections, will HRAI be hosting a webinar to look at this aspect?
Well, it's a good idea. We can certainly explore it. I'd be interested to see if we could find a speaker who would dare to pronounce on that to make economic forecasts. But maybe we can find somebody. And I think what we'll have to look for is for the dust to settle a little bit. You know, we keep using this term, the new normal, for the new normal to set in. Most of this, frankly, is going to be driven by where they see the curve going in the number of infections, the percentage of the population. And I have a sense strongly from the government that they're going to be very, very cautious about resuming or letting go of the reins until there's real confidence that the problem has been resolved. So whether or not there's someone who wants to do an economic analysis in terms of the impacts on the economy with the stock market and all the other impacts, we can certainly look into that. I think it'll be an interesting, possibly depressing discussion, but we'll see if we can find someone who has done some of that analysis.
Okay,
Thanks
I have
for the concept.
okay. I have another question here. Has there been any talk of HVAC techs demanding additional risk pay?
I've not heard that, but Dorothy, have you had any discussions?
I
with
haven't.
contractors
No,
about
I
that?
haven't. I haven't been asked that question. No.
I guess I would maybe ask if members on the call have any of that information. If you could share it with us, then we'll be enlightened. If that's become an issue for some, I can imagine it might be.
Okay, that seems to be all the questions. Do you want to give it a few more seconds? Oh, we have one more. Roger Groshmal. The layoff statement is accurate according to our labor lawyer. In the absence of a union agreement or individual employment agreements that provide for a layoff, severance is required. We require all of our employees to sign off on our employee handbook, which does specify layoff provisions. So I think we are okay. So he's talking about himself. But
with respect to the layoffs,
there's an option. There's an experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Roger. I was expecting that there might be some on the call who might have some experience with this. So thanks for sharing that. Dorothy, sorry, Loretta, are we at the end of the questions?
I've got one more. If there is a number, is there a number to phone if someone sees safety protocol not being followed on a job site? And this is for TSSA.
Yes, there is.
There is, absolutely.
Yeah. For TSSA?
Oh, I actually, I don't know. Sorry.
There is.
Yeah, there is it was the number that was shown earlier at the Ontario. Hang on, I'll find it.
Here it is. It's on the numbers 1-877 202 0008. That's a provincial health and safety number.
Dorothy, can you repeat that? Because I can send it to everybody again.
Yeah, it's on.
If you scroll back to
it's on
slide.
It's on slide 6 of the presentation. If you want to pull that up, it's under right to refuse. Staff have a right to refuse work, but anyone has a right to report.
Next one, Dorothy, Loretta.
Anyone has a right.
One. Yeah.
To report unsafe work conditions. I mean, that could be if you see unsafe work conditions on your own site or someone else's. That's not just specific to your own workplace. That could be something else you see in the general public.
And I think that's also the number, if I'm not mistaken, that they're using for reports of fraud or price gouging. I know that the Premier was on the weekend. He was quite angry, as you probably all have seen on the news, talking about the immorality or whatever of price gouging that's been happening in some places. I think that line is the same number to call if you're seeing some of that. But the other thing he shared, for what it's worth, is they're very unhappy. The government is very unhappy at the moment with job sites, construction job sites, not following the proper protocols. They've had quite a number of calls about that particular problem. Some cases from employees actually refusing to go on a job site. So it's one of the reasons we have a sense that these regulations might be tightened up going forward. Some of the essential services that have been identified, that might change if the government sees or has evidence of lack of compliance with the guidelines. And that's the number to use for reporting that type of activity.
Okay, I have one more question here. We have information from WSIB for deferring monthly payments, but none so far for HST and payroll deductions. Could I get a link to have this in writing?
Well, again, the HST GST piece, that was part of the package the federal government announced on Friday. So that, again, the technical briefing's tomorrow. So that's when we expect the details. So I don't have anything I can send at this point, but we can certainly provide that information once we get it.
So look for that on the website,
or it will be available on our, like we can put it on our website, but certainly it will start to be available on the federal government's website as well. Again, these are big programs they're creating in very short order, so it does take some time to get that level of detail pulled together and shared with the general public.
Okay, I have no more.
So, all right, that's fine. So I think we're close to the end point anyway. I think that's great. In fact, perhaps we'll do some analysis of the details of the federal programs as they are made available. And if it appears like that would be a topic of use to do another webinar on down the road, I'm not sure we have the expertise in-house to be able to comment, but we can maybe find ways to put the right information in front of you, and maybe we'll get somebody from the federal government to help us with that. No promises, just if that's a topic of interest, maybe just say so in your responses in the survey that'll come, I think, after this webinar is completed. And other ideas that anyone might have for a topic that we might want to cover in future webinars, please share those. One other comment I guess I would make is that this webinar will be posted on the website, as will, I think it's both audio and the actual presentation itself. Is that right, Loretta?
Yeah. Yes.
So if you missed any slide or some phone numbers or websites, you can find them by looking for the presentation. Let's say by the end of the day or by tomorrow morning. Okay. On that note, I'd like to thank Dorothy and Loretta for this webinar, and also to Alexandra and Tom for participating, and to all of you who took some time to tune in. Thanks for your time and attention, and stay tuned and stay safe.
Thank
Thanks
you
very much.
Thank you.